All right, good morning, everyone. If I could just ask you to take your seats, we're going to start this session. My name is Haroon Saad. I work for an NGO based here in Brussels called the Local Urban Development European Network, LUDEN for short. It's a network that focuses on what I call key transition issues. And one of those key transition issues, obviously, is the whole issue of migration and integration. The theme of our session this morning is innovative cities and rural communities, and we've got a really good panel to discuss this with you. We have Eleftherios Papagiannakis, who is the Vice Mayor of Athens, which I'm sure most of you know has been one of the hotspots in relation to recent migration flows, and his position was recently created in terms of migration and integration in 2015, but I'm sure he'll talk more about that. Then we have Bjerck, if I've said that right, who is from the Eastern Norway Research Institute, and she's going to be talking in part about Horizon 2020 project called SIMRA, which have been working in rural areas, and some of the work they've done has been around integration of migrants. And then we have Antoine Savary from DG Home, and I think if I'm right, Antoine, you're responsible for legal migration and integration. Okay. Just by way of simple context setting, first of all, a few words from me. I mean, I think it's really quite, I think all of us here probably in this room are well aware that the issue of migration and integration is really one of the hottest issues around at a European level and also at national level. You may be familiar with the Eurobarometer's survey from 2017, which has been produced this year, the results of it. And it's quite fascinating because what's emerging is predictably a lot of contradictions. Just to give you some highlights around what's emerging, I mean, one of the positive messages from that survey is that 60% of the sample survey of 28,000 it was, 60% of them actually have contact with migrants. Therefore, there is a kind of process of engagement and integration taking place in a very informal context. However, at the same time, the survey highlights some of the kind of misconceptions and stereotypes that still prevail around the impact of migration and also what migrants take or contribute. I mean, the other aspect of context, I think, is really just really important, is that whichever way you look at it, migration flows will continue. And they'll continue for a number of reasons. One is to do with demographic change here in Europe. Another is simply to do not just with war and famine, but also, in my view, to do with increasing pressures around climate change. And one of the understated, if you like, factors that I find strange not mentioned in the Syrian conflict is that preceding the civil war, there were 5 years of drought. And 5 years of drought that decimated 84% of the livestock of the country. And that resulted in a huge migration to the cities, which then triggered off all kinds of conflicts in terms of land and access to water. And then the other context, I think, in terms of policy level, is remembering that we have an urban agenda, and that urban agenda has had a partnership, and Greece has been, and Athens has been a member of that partnership. The Commission has been a member of that partnership on integration and migration. And that partnership has come up with a road plan and an action plan. And that, again, is setting forward, I think, a very positive policy context within which European policy can be framed. And then last but not least, I think, in terms of mentioning context, is the issue and the elephant in the room in a way. I mean, there was a very famous article produced in 2004 by a guy called Stephen Castles, who produced lots of stuff on migration. But what he said in 2004, in my view, still applies now. And what he basically said is that there was a gap between policy and delivery. In other words, what was actually the intent and what was actually the result was a huge gap. And he was writing that in 2004. Fast forward now to the settling in reports from the OECD from 2015 and now most recently in 2018. And you find a picture whereby the settling in process has still not worked in the way that was being predicted in terms of policy and direction. And that's resulting in a big debate around how do we measure impact? How can we achieve better coordination? How can we actually, in a sense, be able to bridge that gap between policy and intent? So I'm going to hand over now and start off, and we're going to start off with a round of interventions from the panel. And then I'm going to open the floor up for you, because the aim is not just for us to talk to you, but also for you to engage in a dialogue and discussion questions. I'm going to come to you, Eleftherios, first of all, because I think Greece is a hotspot, Athens is a hotspot. And if I may, maybe if you could start by beginning to talk about the measures that have happened in Athens to address the issue. And in particular, maybe, I was thinking, because you have an urban innovative action, and we're talking about innovative actions. And you have a very, I think, interesting project, which is about addressing the limbo, as you put it. And maybe you could also talk about that.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I know it's a difficult thing to start with a conference at 9 o'clock. I don't want to bother you with the numbers and the historic overview of what happened in 2015, 16 and onwards. So I will come back to, I will directly go to the present. Athens for the moment is participating in many projects that have to do with migrant integration, but also reception and accommodation. For the innovative side of things, I have to remind you that Athens was awarded the Capital of Innovation Award for 2018. So a lot of projects that were very, very innovative. Some of them have to do with reception and integration of migrants and refugees. The Curing the Limbo project is a project that links the community of Athens with the refugees through housing opportunities, access to the labor market, and community engagement. We have a project manager she actually speaks in the next room about this project. So if some of you want to learn more, you can go to room 62 and 63 actually, and learn more about it, or you can find her and ask her more questions. It's an innovative approach for Athens because I have to remind you that in Greece, the municipalities do not have competencies in this area. So the fact that we have a vice mayor or that we address the issues of reception and integration is on its own innovative. It was a question of political will of the mayor. Unfortunately, it comes down to that because the central state, and because Antoine is here, he knows more about it and he understands the context. The central state, as many other countries in the EU, was found unprepared, so the local authorities have had to take over. In the same context, Athens and Thessaloniki, which is the second biggest municipality in Greece, created a network of municipalities for integration. We have now 13 municipalities, medium-sized cities, and we are missing the rural communities, which is one of the points that we were supposed to discuss today. The lack of policy for the rural communities in Greece is quite important, and it's something that we need to see how we are going to deal with it, because rural communities should play a role in integration, because for the moment we are talking only about integration in the urban environment and in the urban setting. And I will end by saying that apart the network of cities, the national one, of great importance, it's the participation of Athens in the European networks, and especially the one that is based here, Eurocities. Through the work of Eurocities, we have been able to exchange good practices and good, policy choices with cities that have been doing this for a long time, and it was very, very helpful for us. And I think that many of the ideas that we came up with was due to that exchange, and of course a lot of discussions on the issues that we are going to face, the issue of undocumented migrants, access to citizenship, etc., etc. So these questions for the future are also very, very important and very difficult to deal with, especially for a country like Greece, who is used to being a transit country and not a reception country. And this change has caused a lot of discussions. It's too soon to say what will happen in the future, but I think that we have to speed up the process. I would stop here because I prefer to discuss more about it later. Thank you.
As I say, we will come back. This is just an opening round. I mean, I come to you then, Murray, to basically maybe share with us some of the, if you like, results and experience you've had of working in a rural context around the theme of integration through your project SIMRA.
I'm not going to talk that much about the results because it's an ongoing project, but I'm going to talk about the experiences that we're having now. So my name is Mari, and I am a researcher and a social anthropologist at the Eastern Norway Research Institute. And we have the Norwegian part of SIMRA, which is the Social Innovation in Marginalised Rural Areas, a EU Horizon 2020 project, which is led by the James Hatton Institute in Scotland. And the aim of that of the project is to understand social innovation and innovative governance in rural development. So the project is not primarily refugee-based. It's based on rural development, agriculture, forestry, and also in Norway we have chosen to take in the refugee part in a specific area of Norway. Yeah. So the empirical parts of the project consist of 12 case studies and 6 innovation actions, and our part is an innovation action, which means that we are involved with enabling relevant actors to test and exploit their potential for social innovation. So what we do in the Norwegian part is to support a local branch of Norway's biggest outdoor recreation organization called the Norwegian Trekking Association. And this local branch of Gudbrandsdalen is in the process of implementing a social innovation that involves bridging the gap between the local community and the newly settled refugees. Doing that, they arrange hikes, activities, and trips, and as such hoping to build social network and cultural capital for the refugees. So this has already been done in an urban part of Norway. So we're taking that, or not us, but the Norwegian Trekking Association is taking that and trying to move it over to the rural context with some modifications. And the larger aim is to contribute to local development and maintaining or even increasing the population level. Because Gudbrandsdalen is dependent on migration in order to sustain. Yeah, so I thought that I could show a movie that is actually taken from the urban part to see what it's about.
Garantere, for dere har prøvd det en gang, da vil dere prøve flere ganger. Og så ta med familien.
Jeg ser på storsamfunnet som en taulag. Man går, ikke sant? Når man går på isbre, så blir man bundet til hverandre. For hvis noen detter, så hjelper, ikke sant, resten av gruppa, sånn at personen kan komme seg opp igjen.
Du må passe på kroppen din, for jeg tror du sånn som tar vare på alle i familien. Barna, mannen. Du glemmer deg selv, ikke sant? Du har mye å tenke på. Og derfor så begynner du å kjenne...
Jeg vil ikke si alle, men de fleste innvandrere inaktive. For det skjer noe med folk når de kommer fra et annet land, en annen kultur. De vet ikke hvordan de skal bevege seg. Og hvis vi klarer å få dem ut i friluft, hvor de føler seg avslappet, hvor de kan være seg selv og beholde sin identitet, så bidrar vi også i folkehelsen.
Du trenger ikke gi meg noe, men bare bruk naturen på egen hånd. Få med andre ut på tur.
Jeg gjorde det, men uten gøy. Men I dag det var veldig godt.
Det var veldig gøy. Ja, så bra.
what we know of the refugees that's in the area is that they want to stay and they want to be considered to be resources in their community. They want to work and they want to establish social networks and ties to their new local community. However, the Municipality Refugee Service, which has the main part in handling and welcoming them and providing the introductory program, that's a 2-year program. Yeah, they're not able to make use of the whole ecosystem of actors that could be activated in integrating them. So there's a strong need for civil society actors to support the refugees in getting involved on the local level and to help them thrive, to feel at ease, and to make them feel at home. Because after all, what we say is that the rural area need the migrants more than the migrants actually need to live in the rural areas. So we need to find a way to keep them and to make them thrive. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Antoine, I come to you, and maybe you could sort of like address sort of like what from the Commission point of view seems to be working and not working, and also in what ways is the Commission seeking to support the kind of actions that we've been hearing about.
Yes, good morning. Happy to be here today with you to exchange. I will not be very long because I think what is interesting in this session is to have an exchange with you and to answer questions. Just a few points. I mean, 4 points that I wanted to mention to introduce a bit the topic from the side of the Commission. I think there's an increasing awareness now at Commission level and at EU level, at least, that the local level is maybe the most important level regarding what we do on integration. We have tried at the Commission level to reinforce our action in that direction. We have participated and funded many networks. We have several DGs, you know, in the Commission, which have a thematic action. We, particularly in DG Home, we have supported, we have been involved in this urban agenda partnership on integration, on inclusion of migrants and refugees. But there are other ones who have been very active on this topic. Maybe networks of cities and regions, like Bjerck, for example, who has worked a lot also on integration. And we think that it's very good. Also in our work with member states, because we have in DG Home a network of member states, which is called the European Integration Network, which is a bit the forum with whom we discuss these questions with member states. We have tried more and more to include the local dimension on the local level in our activities by inviting them to exchange with member state authorities, but also involving them in our mutual learning activities, in study visits, etc. Then this is something on which we are, of course, totally involved, and also in terms of funding. But this I will talk about it later. And I think why did we do that, and why is there an interest? First, because local authorities are of course, the first who have to act to provide basic needs of migrants and refugees, like housing, health, education in many member states. Then they are the most concerned, and the ones who need more support, I would say. We see also that in some member states, the local authorities feel a bit left alone by their national authorities, whether it is in terms of funding or in terms of political support also. That's why at some point, I don't say that we have to replace national authorities, but we have to try to help in the remit of our competencies at EU level to foster and to provide support as much as we can to these local authorities who try to do something on integration. Then on the fact that many networks exist now, that's true that there's been I would not say, I don't like this word, but a proliferation of networks working on integration. I've mentioned the partnership, there's Bjerck, All, there's a Eurocities network, which is the migration group, which is very active also. Then there's also the Council of Europe has this intercultural cities network. Then there are many networks. And I think frankly, it's not necessarily bad. I think there are 500 million citizens in the EU. There are many local cities which cannot be gathered in a sort of giant network which will be unmanageable. Then I think all these networks work in a good direction by exchanging practices, ideas, innovative approaches, as you have mentioned, and I think it's very good and not necessarily a bad thing. Something I wanted to mention also is that we feel that there are really increasing needs on this exchange of information and knowledge on integration. And I think it's also good that some networks focus on one aspect, of integration, like housing, for example. I have in mind this organization, which is Housing Europe, which has worked a lot on this aspect of integration policies, and this is also very good that we have also this thematic approach. We have a bit, I must say, what we see is that these networks most of the time include large cities who are involved a lot in integration, like Athens, etc. What we see a bit of a blind spot in all these networks are indeed the rural areas and the small and medium-sized cities. We don't have necessarily the resources to be involved in these networks, and that's why we are trying at EU level. We have launched to support and to provoke the involvement of these small and medium-sized cities in these networks. We have launched a call for proposal in July, which will end at the end of this month, which will strive to set up some networks of cities and regions, but involving both big cities who have already the experience of integration, and also small and medium-sized cities, in order that they benefit from the experience of others. Then this is something on which we are working. On what works, I think concrete actions are really important. I mean, we have seen it with the Urban Agenda partnership. There have been several actions which have been developed under this Urban Agenda, and I think one of the most successful, the most successful actions, if I can put it this way, were the most concrete one. Also, for example, we have organized a training for practitioners of local and regional authorities. Peer-to-peer exchange on integration, and I think it was very successful, and at least the satisfaction of the people who participated to these exchanges was very high. And I think because it was very concrete, people coming from different cities and exchanging with others on a problem that they are facing. And most of the time, if someone is facing a problem, someone has already had to tackle or to address this issue somewhere else in Europe. Then it's no need to reinvent the wheel, maybe to take a solution which already exists and to adapt it to a local context. And I will stop here, and we can discuss later on other aspects.
As I said, the aim is to have a discussion with you, so I will invite you to ask questions, make comments. Please, when you do so, say who you are, where you're from. I saw a hand go up there. Yes, please.
Okay. Yes, I'm Ernesto Porras from Venezuela. Okay, I have a question because thanks to your presentations, I tried to understand the European vision, and I have just a question: how to handle the shock between the trend of migration? Okay, migrants are going to safety places in the world, like Europe, for example. How to handle the shock between migration, the trend of the fourth revolution. Everybody's talking about robots, everybody's talking about how to change the process in the companies, putting robots rather than people. And there is another third actor in this equation, that is locals. Locals from our country, from your countries, Europeans in this case. How to avoid this shock between these three trains? The train of migrants, the train of locals, and the train of the robots, because everybody is going to the same destination, that is job. you know, the same job maybe, you know. We are talking about blue collars from one side, migrants from the other side, and the fourth revolution. How to handle, because you know, if you go to a business center, everybody's talking about fourth revolution, you know. So how to handle this scenario? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe, Eleftherios, if I come to you, because I mean, it's a very valid point you've made, because essentially, I mean, if you take a city like Athens, I don't know whether the figures are still the same, but I remember when I was there in 2015, unemployment level generally at 20%, youth unemployment, depending on which figure you looked at, was in excess of 30-odd%. That situation hasn't dramatically improved from what I see. So how is it? How are you managing to sort of like meet this tension between the need for jobs for local people plus also the need to integrate migrants into the labour market?
Yes. Thank you for the question. The answer needs a broader discussion on where this world is going. So it's a much more broader discussion. Can we imagine that people will have more free time on their hands, and maybe we should think of ways to handle free time? Are we going to pay people to sit, you know, and just do something else because robots will take over? It's a much broader discussion. And of course, if you link it to migration and people moving, which is part of human history, it's not the first time that people are moving. We are moving since the creation of the world. I mean, I can go a bit, you know, it can be a bit excessive and say that human mobility is a human right. So who can stop people from moving? People move even if conditions are good. Not only poor people or people who come from wars move. We are not happy with the Earth. We want to go to Mars. So it's a broad question, and I don't think we can answer it in 5 minutes. But yes, it is. We need to find an answer in this context. So for your specific remark, you have to create narratives on how to discuss with the locals, especially in a country where it's true unemployment is around 20%, maybe now it's 17 or 18. Youth unemployment was at some point over 50%, not 30. Yeah. It was at some point 65%. The only thing that you can do is to find political narratives to counter, you know, hate speech, racist speech, etc. Take the country out of the crisis and create jobs, but it is a process. It's not happening tomorrow. The issue will not be resolved in 2 years. We need to have a concise plan. Unfortunately, we were late in presenting a strategy for integration. It was presented last week after a long year of consultation and discussion amongst the ministries. There is no easy answer and easy solution out of it, but we can try to convince the local communities and the Athenian society that because we have migrants who are coming in and we get money to do the management of this issue, because it's also a management issue, apart from the humanitarian obligation, etc., for the municipality, it's a management issue, how to deal with it, and try to convince them that a lot of money is being injected into the local economy, and present some figures. For every euro that we invested, X amount is coming back to the Greek and local economy. Unfortunately, we don't have that type of figures. We know that it's going well because we've seen how owners of houses that we rent for refugees have been able to pay their debts, their taxes, etc., and then save some money also. Local businesses have been also able to create new employment places because there were money coming in from the European funds. So this is a concise, a complete discussion that we have to do, a holistic approach. We are not very experienced yet, but after 3 years, I can safely say that things have been getting better. The numbers are not following for the moment, but hopefully at some point the numbers also will be following.
Maybe later on we can come back to this integration strategy and what's in that. But Mari, for you, it's a different situation, isn't it? Because you were talking about the need to actually have migrants to do the work, and therefore then the rural context is about addressing depopulation.
Yes, and I could say that the issue that you raise is something that both the employers, the refugees, and those municipalities who are have a local employment support, who should be prioritized, because there are youth, people falling out of work, and the refugees who need, and all of them often need special support in their employment. So I think it's about having the policies to support the employers, either by knowledge, how to get them into the work, and also substitute the employment. Yeah, I don't think, and it's also about the manual labor, isn't it? Because often the robots enter into the manual labor that you could use when you have a problem with having a normal full-time job. So it's, yeah. I didn't think I was discussing robots today, but yeah, it's it's important.
Maybe I think that the solution will be provided by artificial intelligence maybe in 20 years, maybe, you know. Not machines. The artificial intelligence said to us, okay, this is the efficient solution for the problem. Maybe, I don't know.
Yes, I think your question is very broad. I mean, I think it's much broader than migration. About when you refer to artificial intelligence, I mean, there are some studies on works which have been done which do not relate, but the big question is, which skills will we need in 20 years' time when we will advance on the way to the development of artificial intelligence? And it's not only a question which concerns migrants, but it's for the whole of society. What skills will we need? What jobs will disappear? And of course, based on that, what will be the role of migration and integration in that picture? There's been an interesting piece of work by MPI on that, linking, you know, the developments of jobs and intelligent artificial on migration, which has been released, I think, a few months ago. But you can go on their website, and they have tried to not to address the question because it's a very complicated issue, but they have tried to explore some ways. Just to say that we already have some skills shortages in some sectors, and there are some good projects and some initiatives which try to address these skills shortages. Because, for example, in Germany, I was told yesterday by someone from the BDA, you know, the German Employer Association, they are lacking 70,000 IT people, you know, to work on IT jobs. And there are, of course, development of coding, you know, training programs to integrate migrants on the labor market in this sector, in this industry, which is desperately lacking skills, which is an interesting approach I found. But I think your question is very broad, and nobody has a perfect answer on, first, what will be the jobs and the skills in 20 years' time, and what will be the role of migration and integration in that big picture.
Thank you. And just a small footnote. I mean, if you look at the overall patterns and trends, I mean, we now have more women migrants than male migrants. And if you look at the women migrants in particular, they're heavily focused in the domestic and care sectors. And those are sectors that maybe will not be the sectors that will be touched by robots and artificial intelligence in the short term. Anyway, anyone else, please? Please, yeah, say who you are.
Hello, my name is Yorgos from the UNHCR office in Cyprus. I wanted to ask a question about the project in Norway. Have you faced any challenges in engaging the local population to participate in these projects in rural areas? And whether there are any incentives for the refugees to participate? Because very often we see refugees and migrants in general who are often struggling to survive, who often have to spend a lot of time for the basic necessities of life, not being willing or not even having the time to participate in projects when the outcome is only going to be a long-term integration prospect, which is very important, but it's very difficult to convince a person whose priorities their survival and their family's survival, it can be a challenge to convince them to spend their time in hiking, for example. So I guess my question is both for the incentives for the refugees to participate in such projects in rural areas, and for the local population, what kind of challenges and what kind of methods maybe you use in order to invite them. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really relevant question, because that's what I think we're struggling with in the project, and also involving the municipality refugee services in prioritizing spending time on that. But I think one way to sort of surpass getting the local population involved is that the local branch of the trekking association already has a set of volunteers in the area that we're trying to use. So the volunteers would be more active in that, whereas probably the rest of the population, the rest of the local population, needs to come through those who are already involved in the volunteering bits of it. And in terms of incentives for the refugees, I think it depends on the hike. If you're climbing, if you saw the trip that they took, that's too complex for most of Norwegians as well. So it depends on the level of, I mean, going for a small walk could be one of the things that we would be doing, but and some are active and some are not. But we tried to make hikes and trips and communication with local population a part of the introduction program, so that they have some bits of the introduction program that the municipality can choose for themselves what to do with. So what we're doing is that we're trying to combine the trekking association and getting them involved in the introduction program, and being so that they have the responsibility to take them out when they're already supposed to be at school learning, and say, okay, we have 2 hours now, so let's just go out and do something else. So that would probably solve that. Yeah. Was that an answer?
Yes, thank you. It was a very good answer. It's just that where I was getting at, actually, and thank you for your answer, is it doesn't matter if it's hiking or walking or whatever activity. What we see is that whatever activity it is, in the integration aspect of migration, what we notice often, at least in areas like in Cyprus, for example, is refugees and migrants having a really hard time participating in integration projects, and us being in this situation where we have to find incentives to get them to participate in any activity relating to integration, when you have other issues like access to decent housing, decent employment, and things like that. In Europe, I guess discussing integration projects and activities like this can sometimes be of no use if first communities in Europe haven't managed to deal effectively with such basic aspects of the life of refugees in the host countries. And I guess it can be quite different from Cyprus to Norway. But yes, I think in the EU it's something that we may have to deal with, that some countries have moved away from the initial challenges of immigration, which is access to employment and housing being such a huge issue, and are now ready to invest more in integration activities like this, which are more on the cultural and side of things. But other countries, like smaller countries or maybe poorer countries of Europe, are still struggling with the basics. Yeah, thanks.
I think we're still struggling with the basics. Housing, for example, is a huge problem in rural areas because there are lack of housing for those who come. And so often the houses that they are provided with are bad. And one family got settled in a camping area, which was not suitable for people living there. So it's we have the same problem, but I think everything can happen at the same time as well. You don't have to first that. Obviously, housing is important and work is important, but I think we also see this project as a way for the refugees to get networks and then getting into jobs. So you don't have to have a job and then you have to go on hikes, but it can happen simultaneously. But they actually we have a really strong incentive, and the incentive is if you don't participate in the introduction program, you lose the financial support. Yeah. So if you're not there for an hour, then you get 1 hour less paid. So actually, by implementing this into trying to connect into the introduction program, then if they don't show up, then they won't get paid that day or for those hours. So that's a really strong incentive. Yeah.
I mean, Eleftherios, maybe you could say something about how are you actually creating incentives for the migrants in Athens to participate in the offers that you're making?
The incentive that we use, it's everyday life. I mean, having people in the city that are unable to participate in everyday social life, I think it strains them. So we are trying to engage with them and explain the opportunities that they have, even though little, and how it can be helpful for them, but also for the hosting community to interact. So now we are starting Greek lessons, English, ICT, etc., etc. So the incentive is everyday life, I think. Yes, of course, we have many people who are not participating and they're refusing because they imagine that at some point they will be able to access the country that they dream. But, you know, we have also examples from people who left and came back because either they couldn't adjust or, you know, find it very, very difficult to adjust to a new reality. So you have different and complex schemes, and we have to be there and engage with them in order to understand their needs. And we have teams that do that in the housing scheme that we are participating with UNHCR actually. So engage them in the apartments and also create focus groups, etc., etc. So it's not very easy always. And if there is no incentive, you know, any professional incentive or money incentive, it can be complicated. But for us, there is no other solution for the moment. We are still in the emergency side of things. So reception, accommodation, basic accommodation, and then now we are moving into the integration part of things. The engagement with them is the only, you know, I think, valid solution for the moment.
No, just maybe on this approach to integration between the carrot and stick approach. I mean, because it's a bit what you have to choose. We had some interesting discussions on work in the European Integration Network about this issue. I mean, should you force or should you oblige newcomers to participate to integration courses? If they don't want to participate, what do you do? Do you force them? Do you use the stick approach, and do you cut benefits, or do you cut whatever? The approach of Norway is a bit special because, I mean, in Norway, migrants are paid, you know, to participate to the, and this is not the general picture in the EU. In most member states, migrants participate to integration courses, but they are not necessarily paid for that like a job. They receive benefits, etc. But it's really, I would say, survival, which is not the case for like in Norway. What we have seen on the conclusion of our works on that is that the stick approach does not necessarily work. anyway will not increase the prospect of integration in the mid-long term. And it's maybe better to have a more positive approach by giving incentive to those who really participate and engage in the integration programs. Like, for example, maybe a longer residence permits. That's something which has been done in France and other countries, or maybe to have an easier access to citizenship in the long term. These are maybe some incentives which can maybe work more than cutting benefits, etc., which are going to create problems anyway in the short term.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Kenny Cluid. I work with Ashoka's Hello Europe. It's good to see this topic here and to talk about it. And I think the question I had is, what mechanisms have you found that's really helpful to identify and bring innovation to your cities? Because we're talking about innovation, and you're obviously doing that. But what are some of the mechanisms that are working? How can we support them? And in particular, I think one of the biggest needs that we're identifying as we're working across Europe is changing the narrative of migrants, rather than being seen as people that need help, that are kind of inactive and need to be we need to be helped by these, us privileged people, to kind of have them leading some of the initiatives. And I know that's a concern for all of you. Have you identified special initiatives that do that, or innovation that does that? Or maybe the question goes back a little further. Have you identified mechanisms or funding or ways to kind of bring those innovations, particularly to cities and communities? Because that's where we see it's like needed with urgency. Countries can talk about it, the EU can talk about it, but cities need it yesterday. And so I know that's a huge need for you. Have you found some mechanisms, or are there ways that you found to kind of identify that and bring that home, literally?
I mean, Eleftherios, you mentioned the need for changing the narrative, and in what ways do you see that as happening in Athens?
As you know, we've met before, so one of the things that we are doing as a city is to be open in any type of discussion with partners that are interested in intervening into the city. As you know, the collaboration between NGOs and the local authorities is not always very easy, because in some cases it's new, in some cases the cities, the municipalities or the local authorities are not interested, or they have a different approach. It has to do also with political choices, etc., etc. So in Athens, we chose to be open and receptive, and we are discussing with NGOs that are willing to implement projects, or are interested in find out what we do and how they can help and anchor on what we do. So because a local authority is not an NGO, and this is also something that we need to understand between us, because discussing with NGOs sometimes ends up discussing about what the municipality should do, and we should do more, and you have to be more active, and we forget that the municipality is a local authority and it's an institution, and we have limits, and there are laws, etc., etc. So the way we handle that is to discuss for a long period of time with NGOs and understand the roles of each other. So we have NGOs that are active in Athens. We have more than 100, maybe 150, doing things that have to do directly or indirectly with refugees and other vulnerable groups. We have a coordination center that we meet all together, so we have more than 100 members, and we are open in any type of discussion. So, and we collaborate as a municipality with organizations in order to do that. So you remember that we've met with Organization Earth, etc., etc. So this is a process and something that we need to, it's kind of a breakthrough for the municipality. Because in this case, I would say, I'm not all for that, but it's also, we have at some point to decide if it's a bottom-up or top-down process. For the municipalities, unfortunately, there is no other way. So if there is the political will, it's a top-down process, because if the municipality is active, the actors are going to come and be more open themselves. So this was the choice that we made, and I think that for the moment, for the 3 years that we've been doing this, we have a positive outcome. And we have some concrete projects that are being implemented in Athens, more or less innovative also, that have to do with social responsibility in fashion, the catering services, etc., etc. And now, next week, we have a big conference on trafficking and social responsibility for businesses. So it's coming along. but it's also a question of willingness of the actors between them to collaborate. You know, it's a very basic need or a very basic thing to do. If you are willing to discuss, then the discussion will start. If you're not, then you know everything stops.
How have you tried to change the narrative in your project?
I don't think we have worked a lot of changing the narrative, but what we know is that that over the last 3-4 years, it's been much harder to get the local community on board because of the narrative that is now. So, but maybe this project is a way to actually change the narrative, to get them to meet the refugees, get to the actual meeting points between the refugees and the local community, and think that would be, and then presenting the good examples using media, for example, and yeah. But you asked about the mechanisms of social innovation, right? Did you? Yeah. That work, yeah. Yeah. Because what we see in the rural community is that they really need support to know what works, how to support the initiatives, and to make them into social innovations. Both for the refugees who are coming, and in the rural areas there are a lack of work and places to work, so they need to create their own jobs. So how to support them in that? That's what they really need, support in doing that, because that is not in place in these areas that we work with as of now. So, yeah.
And just to add something, you know that there is a huge discussion and a huge conspiracy theory on the role of NGOs, you know, around the refugee situation. I think that a good mechanism to change the narrative is to support them in a way, you know, politically also, to support the way that we collaborate with them. So whenever there is in the municipal council some crazy conspiracy theory that the NGOs are here to get the money and run, you know, you try to answer point by point and to support the choice that you have made. So this is a very basic narrative that you have to keep, stability, and, you know, of course there are issues. And every time there are issues, you have to be there and point them out. But you have to have a general direction. So I think that the basic thing to do for a municipality, and not for the NGOs, at least for us, who are collaborating a lot with all of them, or the ones that want to be part of the plan, is to have a very, you know, concise policy and support.
Yes, on changing the narrative is something on which we have reflected also at EU level. Should we do something about this? I mean, at our level, which is of course quite far from the citizens. Well, we came to the conclusion, discussing it with member state authorities, that, you know, a top-down approach, like a big campaign at EU level to do that, would be counterproductive. Then, in the current context, I think I can only echo what you said, Mary. The day-to-day contact, the showing good example of integration, but in the community, you know, not far, not somewhere else. I mean, we have some interesting result from the EU barometer on that. I mean, the people who are most open to integration and migration live in places, on areas where you have a higher percentage of migrants. Then it's not by accident. It's the fact that you live with these people, you get to know them, and then you become more tolerant and open. Then that's what we have to try to do, especially in areas where there's no migrant. You know, if you want to settle some people in rural areas where there's nobody, I think putting them like this is a recipe for disaster. You really have to talk to people before. I'm just thinking of example like Altena, you know, in Germany, where it's quite a success story in terms of integration, but there's been a work which has been done, you know, towards the local population, to explain them what it was about, etc., to prepare the ground, and also to address fears and anxiety about newcomers. And I think it's something which is I wanted to stress.
Thank you. I'm looking to see. It's all been men so far. I don't want to sort of like discourage those who've gone on, but it has all been men so far. So I'm looking to see if there is a woman who will. No. I will come to you. You had your hand up first, sir.
Thank you. Filippo Plus Value, we work with the coalition that brings together the Turkish government, UNDP, and the Gates Foundation to address refugees in Turkey. Inspired by what's happening on the climate change scene, where we have seen on one side national politics stuck because some governments decided to block the process, and on the other hand, cities moving ahead, really jumping ahead in partnership with business, philanthropic institutions. Can we envisage something similar on the refugees issues? I don't think, being Italian based in the UK, that the European approach will move very far, because clearly some governments are not willing to do it. But some cities might do it, and not just within the European Union, but working across European boundaries, also with cities outside of the European Union. What do you think it could be a political agenda led by cities? Thank you.
For that, I mean, the SIMRA project actually goes beyond Europe. I mean, your project,
it's the Mediterranean project.
Yeah, absolutely. So it actually cuts across. So how have you found that? To what extent has that sort of enabled a difference? The question basically was around, to what extent is it necessary to build, if you like, relationships with cities outside Europe as well as inside Europe? In other words, it's the city level that will maybe be the catalyst for real change, rather than the national level that will be the catalyst for real change. Have you had a feel for that? Well, I'll come to you.
So I have to remind you that we had the signature of the Global Compact on Migration a few months ago. And in parallel, in the same time, although many countries bailed on the signature, you had many cities that signed a mayor's declaration on the Global Compacts. So more than 80 cities signed, and amongst the cities you had cities from Europe, but also cities from Canada, from the United States, etc., from Africa. So you have now even an informal network of cities that have decided to do things together. It's not very organized yet, but cities are taking a part that is missing. For example, Milan signed for Italy. Italy didn't sign, so Milan signed for Italy, if you want. And New York, Los Angeles, Chicago signed for the US. And you have many other municipalities that have signed for countries that didn't sign the Global Compact. And because of that process, we have now a Mayors Migration Council. You have 8 mayors from all over the world as an executive board proposing and taking action into the context of migration and refugees. There will be the first meeting in July, I think. So you have an action of municipalities, or political action of municipalities, who are going above the countries. I have to remind you also that after the initiative of the Mayor of Athens, we have a Solidarity Cities Network initiative now, where European cities have signed a pledge in order to take refugees from Athens. It's a very symbolic pledge. Take refugees from Athens and move them from city to city. Of course, the governments blocked that process. The first city that signed was Barcelona. So Athens, the mayor of Athens and the mayor of Barcelona signed the document saying that we will take refugees from Athens and take them to Barcelona, who had, if I remember well, 18,000 places ready for refugees, and they received 100, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But the Spanish government was not very keen into receiving, refugees. So you have initiatives on the European and the international scene showing that the municipalities are willing to go or to bypass the national system. It is a process. It's still in, we are still moving, but compared to 3 years ago, I would say that we have made huge steps. I don't know how this will evolve, because it has to do a lot with the personalities of the mayor and the political will of the mayors as persons. But there is a trend and a way of acting and doing politics and policy I would give the example of Sao Paulo, who was very, very active in discussing about refugees and migrants, but unfortunately, due to the change in the government, I don't know what they will do from now on, but this is an actual discussion that has been going on for the last at least 4 years. And I think that the European Commission has also something to say about it, because for a long time cities wanted to participate in the European process and dialogue, and in the beginning there was no connection, and now I can say that cities are invited by the Commission to participate in this context. So we have a long-standing dialogue between cities that are active in the refugee context, and sometimes we are not saying the same things as the government. So it is something exists there, and we need to promote it.
I just wanted to make a point. I can only agree with what Eleftherios said. We are trying to support networks of cities, etc. We have this call for proposal ongoing, etc. But we don't have to underestimate, of course, the role that the national level plays in all the integration policies. I mean, we know that all the legislative framework for integration, all the design of the policy remains in the hand of member states. Then we should not, I mean, try to think that, okay, let's work at EU level, on local level, on integration, and we will solve all problems. This will not work. I mean, we still have to talk to member states and try to convince them that they have to invest on integration, and that integration is a good thing to invest on, as 70% of EU citizens think, according to our last Eurobarometer. That's a point I wanted to make. And Eleftherios will only agree with me, but now in Greece there's at least finally a national integration strategy which has been adopted, which will be, of course, quite a help or support for the work that Athens do on the Thessaloniki and other cities. Then let's not forget the national level also.
I'm going to come to you, Sasha.
Thank you, Serge Edwards from Housing Europe. Just actually, Antoine has reacted a little bit in the same direction. I just have a comment about the findings we heard about from Norway, and also some other evidence we have come across where people, for example, during the application process are based in rural areas, but then when they have become status holders, they often are going to cities because the areas where they were based in temporary accommodation do not have the facilities to allow them to stay. So I think I wonder, is it a bit of a risk to talk about, cities taking the lead when actually we really do need a national strategy, so that areas, so rural areas or areas in decline can also have full support to allow people to stay, keeping in mind that some refugees may come from rural areas and may actually feel better staying where they were on a temporary basis.
Yeah, just a comment to the comment. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the advantage often is, I mean, the municipalities in the rural areas and really are in need of support in order to get them to stay. And also, I think one of the advantages of the rural areas, at least for those refugees that are from rural areas, that they need to use not only impose our reality on them, and also listening to them and what experiences they have and how they see themselves creating their own jobs, for example, in the rural areas with the knowledge that they have. So I think it should be like a dual approach, and I see that for Norway, for example, the municipalities are not good at doing that. So that's an area that needs to be explored and, yeah, do something with.
I would agree that there is a risk of having everyone in the cities, and we see that in Greece now, actually. That's why we need a plan, and I will agree totally with Antoine. We need a plan, but the plan has to take care of all the elements. I mean, now, for example, we use rural areas to accommodate asylum seekers, but for a provisional period, without any type of support. So the accommodations are outside the center of the rural area, either, you know, in some mountain or in a remote area, and suddenly when people become holders, they come into a city because the family is there, the community is there, etc., etc. Although we have to explain them that the opportunities are not in the cities for the moment. So you need mapping, skills assessment, then a project, because you cannot oblige someone to go into a rural area to work because there is work if he cannot, you know, cope with that. So you have to have a complete and concise policy. The national strategy hopefully will help us do that, but there is a risk if you don't, you know, you don't counter that trend. You will have everyone living for Greece in Athens, and this is something that we see. We have people who enter from the northern border of between Turkey and Greece, and they come directly to Athens, and they, you know, you have to cross the whole country in order to arrive from the north, in order to arrive to Athens, because Athens is the center of everything. That's what they know. So you have to have some type of policy explaining where the opportunities are, where the possibilities are for accommodation, work, etc., etc. So, but this is missing, and we've been missing that for 3 years, and it's very difficult to reverse the trend. There is a need.
We've run out of time, so I want to first of all show our appreciation to the panel. Thank you very much for your contributions.